It's important to, I think, point out too that the FBI had some tips or some information that something may be about to occur. There were several agents out in the field that had picked up source information and they were trying to pass that along. But what happened was, at the time, the FBI was not allowed to share information with local and state officials unless they had a top secret clearance.
This is Off the Record, FBI Agent's Perspective. I'm Clark Donley. My co-host is Jessie Hemmelgarn, and our co-host is Harry Trombitas, retired FBI Special Agent. Coincidentally, we scheduled the recording for this episode on September 11th, and it's the 23rd anniversary of the terrorist attacks in New York, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and Washington, D.C. that claimed thousands of American lives. We're going to take time for this episode to discuss that from three different points of view. But Harry, we want to start with you. One of the things we always say, where were you when? Where were you, when you heard that John Kennedy had been killed? Where were you when? Well, Harry, where were you on 9/11?
Yeah, it's one of those things you just never forget. Ironically, I was working a kidnapping case at the time. Erica Baker was kidnapped in Kettering, and I had a lead at the Ohio Women's Reformatory in Marysville that an inmate there may have some information about who was responsible for her kidnapping. And so I drove out to Marysville, got to the Women's Reformatory about 8 in the morning, and went inside. When you check in at a jail or prison, or in this case, a reformatory, there's a process, a security process you have to go through. You have to check in at the gate. You have to leave your weapons, cell phone, anything like that you have, that an inmate could get a hold of and maybe cause some harm, and that you have to leave that locked up. So you're really not allowed to take anything in. I was allowed to take a notebook and a pen to take notes, but that was it. I wasn't allowed to carry anything else in. And so I went through the check-in process, and they ushered me back to an interview room and had the inmate, female inmate, come up and sit down with me. Actually was in an office, and we talked for probably an hour and a half or so, just going through the information that she might have and her thoughts, and that she was locked up at the time, so she obviously didn't participate in the kidnapping, but she had friends on the outside that she thought had some information in that. So we went over all of that, and it was about 9:15 or so when I finished up with her and let the guards know I was ready to head back out, and got the escort back up to the front where the security desk is, and pick up my stuff. And the security officers said, "Boy, are you going to be busy?" I said, "What do you mean?" And they said, and they pointed up in the corner of the room at a TV and said, "Our country is under attack." And I was like, "What?" And yeah, they've somebody's blown a plane into the World Trade Center, and it was apparently the second plane had already just hit, and it was quite a mess. And so I grabbed my stuff and I ran out to the car, looked at my phone, and it was I had all kinds of messages to get to the office, immediately. And so I made a beeline back to the office and went inside. And I mean, every single agent that we had and support personnel were in a conference room talking about what had just occurred. We had the TV on where we could see, the destruction and everything. And it was, about that time we were learning about the Pentagon. Also had a plane that, crashed into it. And then the third plane out in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, had crashed. And all these things were happening. Our bosses are getting phone calls from headquarters uh, with things that we need to do immediately to continue to start an investigation in our area. The way that this turned out to be organized or handled was the FBI headquarters would get thousands of tips from citizens who claimed to have information about all the people involved, or had some other information that we needed to have in order to, we were trying to accomplish two things. Number one, find out what happened and who was involved, and number two, try to prevent anything further from happening. So there was just kind of a two-pronged approach, and FBI headquarters would get all the tips and the leads, and then they would funnel them out to the field. We have 56 field divisions throughout the country, and another 300 and some resident agencies. They're smaller agencies assigned to the home division, and wherever the leads needed to be covered, those would be sent out to their appropriate office for follow-up and investigation. And so that the leads were starting to come in of things that we needed to do in the Columbus area, people that we needed to interview. We had to check, and apparently we were finding out that there were some flight schools that were involved, and we had flight schools in our area that we needed to check and see if there was anybody, possibly involved from our area. And I mean, it was just 100% chaos, trying to get everything rolling and moving in the right direction, and that we were being torn in so many different directions. But fortunately, we were able to get organized and start conducting the investigation that we needed to. As most people know, there were almost 3,000 people that were killed in the three locations: World Trade Center, Pentagon, and Shanksville. And we had two FBI special agents that, when the first tower was hit, responded. They happened to be close by the World Trade Center, and they responded and started evacuating people. And then when the buildings collapsed, they were among the people that were killed. Of course, we had other agents and personnel that responded to the area, but those two happened to be there when the building collapsed. And another thing I think that's important for people to know is we have an evidence response team that we send all over we actually have evidence response teams all over the country. And so wherever there's a major crime of some kind, or to help support ongoing investigations in the respective divisions, these are trained individuals who are experts in evidence handling and crime scene investigation. And we had agents that were sent to all three locations: the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and to Shanksville, to work the crime scenes, to try to piece things together the best they could about what happened, how it might have happened, and go through the evidence and recover human remains, and just try to process the scene the best that they could. And now we're what, 23 years later, and we have had 30 FBI special agents that have died due to cancer that experts can indicate came directly from the crime scene processing and the chemicals and the fumes and things that were on the scene. Our people were provided with protective gear, but at the time it was not sufficient to protect them from what they were encountering at the different locations. And so, again, almost 30 people have died directly related to the crime scene processing. And I'm assuming that we'll probably have a number of agents more who are already sick or have developed cancer who will end up dying from what they did that on 9/11.
And that's just in the FBI. There's lots of law enforcement
Oh, yeah.
and firefighter and EMTs and lots of personnel all over the country who were in these same conditions.
Absolutely. And in no way, shape, or form am I indicating that it was only the FBI agents that this happened to.
Oh, but we only have the numbers. That's what I wanted. That's just the numbers that we were talking about today. There's so many more people impacted as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a national effort, and I know Clark, you were around, and Jessica, you were younger at the time, but the dedication of the men and women that went to the different locations and helped piece things together and investigate, and the crime scene processing that was done. As that I'm sure there's dozens of people who have passed away because of cancer that weren't FBI agents. So absolutely, the devastation was felt by all the agencies that were involved.
And like you, Harry, I was at work that morning. I was news director at the radio station in Columbus, Ohio, and saw the CNN video, recorded video of the first plane crashing into the tower. And we were conducting our morning radio show. The regular hosts were on vacation that day, but I and another person were doing that. And from that point on, our microphones were open. And for the next several hours, we didn't take a break. We had to try and tell our listeners what was going on at a time when getting information was very difficult. We didn't bring your smartphone in and check websites. The best we could do was basically turn on CNN and watch and try and describe to people what was happening as it was happening. I like to think we did a pretty good job. I have a coworker who was listening at the time and was very upset. But she said the way that I and my co-host covered that, being able to listen to us, was such a comfort that when we got together again after the event, she said, I need to give you a great big hug. And every September 11th since then, she's come to my office or found me in the hallway and says, I need my hug. This morning, just minutes before we started this recording session, I got a text. I need my hug. And so I sent her an emoji with a hug. It was an event that just changed everyone's lives who was aware of it, witnessed it, or was aware of its importance and its significance at the time. Jessie, you were not at work, although if you want to call being a high school student work,
I
was doing your job.
A little younger. And I think that's an interesting perspective too, because I don't think a lot of us in a younger age who were around then knew the extent and what that meant. Does that make sense? A lot of us are still learning about our country and our government and how everything works. And especially if you're from, Ohio or another state and you haven't traveled a lot, which I hadn't at the time. New York City felt very far away. The Pentagon was just an idea in the head. So all of these were like abstract ideas. And it was really, really interesting from that perspective. But my teacher was a former Marine, and he was a very funny man. He didn't really get very strict very often. But when the rumor, because again, cell phones, not really a thing, we heard rumors in a hallway. It was like a bad game of telephone. That the Twin Towers had been attacked. None of us knew what that meant. But when that gentleman, my German teacher, ex-Marine, his face just went white and ashen and still. And that's when I knew something had happened. And so the rest of the day, I mean, as teachers, we're trained. I was a former teacher much later in life, obviously, not during this time. We're trained to help students, but maybe not to the extent of that trauma. And so we spent most of the day just watching the news, watching people like Clark explaining to us what happened. And in that respect, that was very helpful, especially when we were further away and it kind of felt removed from it.
Yeah. Now, as you mentioned, you became a teacher later on and taught students who were not alive on 9/11.
Yes.
One, what was their take, or how did you approach that with them?
That was really interesting because we had one of the big anniversaries while I was still teaching. I want to say like the 20th anniversary of September 11th. And a lot of the students weren't alive or were like one. And they were like, what is the point of this? I don't understand. We get it was a big deal, but it's just a lesson in our history book. Think about like any other history lesson you go through. And it helped that I was in high school, so I could recount for them what was happening. And I was their age, which I think helped immensely. But I was a video teacher, so my students made a documentary and they interviewed every teacher, every adult in the building, talking about what their experience was like during September 11th. And those students, then really it kind of hit. Again, as you both said, unless you experience it, you can't explain it to someone else. But seeing those live experiences from other people that they know and love and value was immensely important for them. And later on, that helped me a lot when I taught during the pandemic. Which is, I would equate as similar in respect that our country was pretty traumatized. And my students created video diaries so that for future history lessons, kids knew what high school students were doing during the pandemic. And we shared them with the history department. Because I think it's really easy if you're removed from it to think, oh, that was a terrible thing and I'm going to go about my day. But September 11th is a very somber day, I think, for all of us that were around, regardless of how you were impacted, some more somber than others. And keeping these memories and stories alive is really important for those who weren't around.
Agree with that. And Harry, you mentioned Shanksville, Pennsylvania. For those folks who don't know the history, just real quick, one of the planes that was hijacked that did not reach its target was a flight from New York, and I believe it was over Ohio when it was hijacked. And so it turned around in midair somewhere in the Cleveland area and then was crashed in a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, although it was, I believe, destined to be crashed into the Capitol in Washington. So there was work, as you mentioned, for the FBI to do, but there was also the work of the FBI continuing to investigate crimes that had nothing to do with this event. What were the offices or the divisions within the FBI, Harry, that did have to continue with a 9/11 related investigations? How did the FBI get pulled into that in those days, weeks, months that followed?
Yeah, it's very interesting situation that occurred, and the one thing I want to point out too before we move on is, there was a true sense of nationalism, I think, after 9/11.
Absolutely.
I have never seen so many American flags flying. It was like we were all together as one, no matter what your background was, your ethnicity or any of that. We were all one nation, and we were all affected by 9/11 and what had occurred. And it was a feeling, that I'll never forget. I've never felt a more sense of country and sense of duty from regular people, everybody that I did after 9/11. And sometimes I think back about how everybody really worked to get along and tried to make the world a little bit better, and that I kind of miss that feeling. I don't want another tragedy, obviously, like that, but just the way we had all come together, I wish we could do that again. But right now we're pretty divided in that. So we'll see, what happens in the future. But while all this is going on, and it's important to, I think, point out too that the FBI had some tips or some information that something may be about to occur. There were several agents out in the field that had picked up source information, and they were trying to pass that along. Um, but what happened was, at the time, um, the FBI was not allowed to share information with local and state officials unless they had a
Hmm.
top secret clearance.
Wow. Okay.
And
Wow.
so a lot of, and if an agent would share top secret information with someone who did not have a top secret clearance, they actually could go be arrested and placed in jail. So the way our structure was set up at the time, the limitations that we had in sharing information, so much um, information that could have been passed on that might have been able to help prevent 9/11 never got to where it needed to go. And after that, I think Congress realized we cannot handcuff our law enforcement agencies like this. We've got to give them the ability to share information on these types of matters and that. And so they removed a lot of the barriers that went in that we faced back then back in 2001. And so we're in a much better position we are now to share information with our law enforcement partners than ever before. And that's the way it should be. But, again, unfortunately, those hindrances that the FBI faced at the time really didn't help the situation out at all. And I think more could have been done to help prevent what occurred had we been able to share the information. So that hindsight, as they say, is 2020. So we've taken steps to improve that, and hopefully we'll never see a repeat of that kind of thing in the future. But
Certainly not. Before
Yeah, I had
we,
no idea. Clark,
yeah.
did you have any idea about that? I
I,
had no idea.
I knew something about it, not quite to that detail, or at least not as explained as well as Harry just did in layperson's terms. But yeah, I read the 9/11 Commission report, and it was disturbing how the system was set up that made it so difficult for those agents who, as you said, Harry, had picked up source information and then could not pass it along to the people who needed to know it on the local level. Congress did take action. The Department of Homeland Security is one of the results of that action in order to try and improve the communication and coordination among our intelligence and law enforcement agencies nationwide. But before we close it out, real quick, Harry, Which are the offices within the FBI that were doing that work? We think of the FBI and sometimes as investigating crimes, bank robberies, and kidnappings, but much of the FBI's efforts are devoted toward watching, spying on, for lack of a better term, in some cases, our nation's enemies and collecting intelligence. And so, what are the offices in the FBI that do that?
Yeah, it's the FBI, and again, I'm going to try to talk a little bit about the overall structure, and then try to get it down to more of the local level. But I think it's important for people to understand that we are an international agency. We have offices in the United States as well as outside the United States. We probably have over 60 what we call legal attaches spread out around the world so that we can respond to different crimes and things that occur that affect the United States. So we're truly an international agency. Of course, the FBI is run, we have one director, and he's appointed by the president and approved by Congress. And that individual is the head of the FBI, and we have a deputy director who's underneath the director, and he or she assists with the day-to-day processes of that go on within the FBI. Then we have associate deputy directors, and they support the deputy director and manage other administrative functions. As far as the different branches of the FBI, we have an intelligence branch, and Clark, you kind of hit on this. This is, the intelligence branch is really the arm of the FBI that analyzes intelligence and tries to provide support to FBI operations that are going on, not only within the United States, but outside the United States. And, of course, the CIA is really responsible for intelligence outside the United States. The FBI is responsible for intelligence gathering and that within the United States, but there's some leakage. We do, both agencies do cut into a little bit, of each other's area from time to time. But for the most part, that's the way that it's set up. The National Security Branch handles counterterrorism, counterintelligence, weapons of mass destruction, all these kind of things that every once in a while you'll hear about. So we have a National Security Branch. The criminal, cyber, and service branches manage criminal investigations, cyber crime, crimes against children, and other kind of critical incidents that occur around the country. For example, when you have a school shooting or a mass shooting, we provide assistance on those types of cases. We have a science and technology branch that provides technology and scientific support, including forensic analysis to our operations throughout the United States and beyond. And of course, you have to have information and technology branch that provides security for the infrastructure of the FBI and beyond, handles all of our data that we collect. And we have a human resources branch that's responsible for recruitment, training, and employee management. And so that's kind of the way the FBI headquarters is set up. But now moving down to the more local level, you have 56 field divisions throughout the United States, spread out, and 350 resident agencies that are associated with the different field divisions. For example, the Cincinnati division, which Columbus is a part of has a Dayton resident agency, Columbus resident agency, Athens residence agency, and Portsmouth also the Cambridge resident agency. And so you can see how, the Cincinnati division, everything south of Mansfield, to the Ohio border, all the way down south through Cincinnati, is broken up into those resident agencies. And then, of course, the rest of Ohio, for example, has the Cleveland division, and they handle everything north of Mansfield and that. So, but every state basically has a field office that the territory is broken down into resident agencies and smaller cities and that. And I mentioned that we have an international presence. We have over 60 legal attaches, and I've heard there's now another additional 20. They don't really call them legal attaches, but 20 other offices where the FBI has a presence in that. So, it's again a truly international organization, and that's really the one of the strong points about the FBI is when we have an incident or something that occurs in one part of the country, if we need assistance in another part of the country, we can send a lead or request investigation conducted in that particular area rather than having to have agents travel from one area of the country to the other. We've got somebody that can provide that for us. So it's a pretty good system that works out. Again, the men and women that work in the FBI are dedicated to their jobs. We have over 200 different types of careers and jobs in the FBI. Everything, starting with special agents, intelligence analysts, science and medicine is another field that we have, technology, engineering, mathematics, and data. So we have all these different kinds of positions. So if there's somebody out there who would be interested in a career in law enforcement at the FBI level, they should go to fbijobs.gov, and there's a listing of all the different kinds of jobs, what the requirements are. You can actually apply online and check out the FBI main website, fbi.gov, see the different kinds of things that we investigate. So we need good people from all walks of life. It doesn't matter what your background is, your ethnicity, any of that. We need people from every walk of life, and I would strongly encourage anybody that has an interest in it, in a career in the FBI, that they give it a look. From my perspective, it was the greatest organization. It is the greatest organization, in my opinion, in the world, and especially when it comes to law enforcement. And I can't recommend it enough. The places that I've been, the people I've met, the things that I've gotten to do have been way beyond anything I ever imagined. And I'd like to see other people have an interest pursue it.
All right. Jessie, what are the takeaways from this conversation about 9/11 and the FBI's role in the investigations?
Well, I was going to switch it up this week, maybe, and ask you what you want people to remember about 9/11, both of you and myself. What do we want people to remember years from now? And what overall arching theme we think of when we think of 9/11. So if you want me to go first, I will, to give you guys a chance to think.
Yes, we need
But
all the time we can get.
But I really loved, Harry touched on this earlier, but the sense of nationalism that occurred in our country for the first time in my life. I felt a large feeling of what it meant to be American, and everyone around us was rallied toward a similar cause and was proud of who we are and where we live and wanted to help each other. And everyone was just kinder overall in general. And that to me is one of the most memorable parts of 9/11 in the positive side too. Again, as Harry said, we don't want another tragedy to occur to have us all feel that way. But that was a beautiful thing that came out of a terrible situation.
Harry, what would you like us all to remember?
Yeah, I think Jessica, really hit an important part, the nationalism that we all felt. And, one thing that we learned too is, not to lump everybody in, to as Hillary would say, a basket of deplorables. Uh, we, we certainly have people from different religious backgrounds and that in our country. And, uh, I saw, unfortunately, there were people who kind of lumped everybody together as and that these different people in our country were part of they were the bad guys, even though they had nothing to do with 9/11 at all, and are in fact Americans and were affected by 9/11 just like everybody else. But there was a period of time, I think, where unfortunately, some of our different religious groups, took a lot of heat just for being who they are, and that was one thing I think that the FBI worked hard on is to indicate to people, hey, you know, they had nothing to do with 9/11. Don't focus your hate on our people here. They're good, honest, hardworking people, and please don't stereotype and lump somebody into what happened in 9/11. Um, don't lump our people into that kind of a group. So I think that was another thing that I remember happening that was kind of a negative, but I think we've overcome that for the most part. Um, and then I think the FBI realized that we had missed some opportunity to maybe prevent this from occurring. I know that in some regards we were handcuffed by what we could do and say, but I wish that we would have been able to pick up on some of these things a little quicker and take an action to maybe prevent some of these things from occurring. But unfortunately, that wasn't to be. So, I know that I have a lot of regret that we couldn't have done more to head this off before it happened. But, you know, that I think we tried to do everything we could at the time, and again, hindsight is 2020, and it would not happen this way, or it would not happen that way again today, which I think is a good thing. And I see examples every day of our law enforcement agencies all working together to share information and to prevent different kinds of crimes from occurring in our country. And the fact that we've had so many different potential terrorism incidents prevented here in our country. If you pay attention to the news, you'll see, occasionally, this was disrupted, that these people wanted to do that. They wanted to, blow up a bridge. They wanted to hurt a group of people. And we're able to prevent those things from occurring because we're all working together. And I think that's a real life lesson that I hope we carry with us because we're a very powerful group when we all work together.
We are indeed. I guess my takeaway is to tell people to be aware. Um, the ramifications of 9/11 are very much still with us. One of the issues in the recent presidential election has been the withdrawal from Afghanistan after America's longest war, which began because the because the nation of Afghanistan harbored some of the terrorists who masterminded the 9/11 attacks. My oldest child, my daughter, spent almost a year in Iraq because of 9/11. And my request, I guess, to to you listeners and viewers, be aware of the world around you. A lot of us were taken by surprise, maybe all of us, on 9/11. Why would someone do that? Who is to blame? And, as one who, woke up on a morning to find that his oldest child was in a combat zone and kind of scratched his head and wondered why, it behooves us all to remember the lessons. And one of the lessons that has come out of 9/11 is see something, say something. I think we all are familiar with that phrase, that this can happen here. A lot of us, grown up with the idea that, with these two gigantic oceans on either side of our country, we're pretty much safe. Well, we're not always entirely safe. And so be vigilant about the world around you. What is happening in other countries? What is the role the United States may be playing in those events? And just remember that not everyone, wishes us well. And I just hope people remember to be vigilant and be aware, be informed about the country and about the world. Jessie, how can folks find us and tell their friends about us?
We're on all of your favorite podcast apps, as well as social media, our own website, and of course, YouTube.
All right. Now, for their reflections on September 11th, 2001, I thank Jessica Hemmelgarn and retired FBI Special Agent Harry Trombitas, as always. And I thank all of you for being with us today.
Off the Record, an FBI Agent's Perspective is created and hosted by Clark Donley, Harry Trombitas, and Jessie Hemmelgarn. Produced by Jessie Hemmelgarn. Stories in this podcast are inspired by Harry Trombitas' autobiography, Dark Places, about his time in the FBI. Music is called Cruise in the Back and is available on Storyblocks. You can find this podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms, YouTube, and on our website.